Hello and welcome everybody to a really interesting SHMA talk today. Legal sector, is the future bleak or bright? Are we doomed or not? I think is the alternative phrase for our talk today. So I've got a really great panel with some really varied experience, as you're about to find out. So first of all, I've got Emma Gibson joining me, who has done the opposite to what I've done in my career. Really, she started in working for law firms like SHMA, but now she works for one of the big four as a lawyer. We've got Dean Jones here from Lloyds Bank. He's a regional director for Lloyds Bank, and he sits on the CBI East Midlands Council. I sit on the West Midlands Council, so we've kind of got the Midlands stitched up there between us, Dean. And then last but definitely not least, our new Chief Financial Officer, Paul Bird, who hasn't actually joined the firm yet, but we've managed to persuade him to hop online and have a chat with us all about things. Paul also has a really varied and interesting background. As far as the legal sector is concerned, he's set up a disruptor legal brand with Riverview, and then obviously worked with EY as they transferred that brand over there. So hopefully we've got a really interesting mix of expertise here to talk about how we see the future of the sector. So if I may turn to you first, Emma, just to kind of add to that in terms of a brief intro.
Hi, yeah. So as you said, Emma, I now work in at KPMG. I'm a partner in KPMG. I've come in to set up their legal offering across the south and join that fledgling law brand and firm within KPMG, one of the big four. That's after 20 odd years in private practice. So I've made that move across, and it's a world of adventure.
So Dean?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So I've been with Lloyds for 32 years in various roles, been a regional director for the last 10 years, and I've got the privilege of running a team that looks after our mid-corporate business from South Wales to the east of England, looking after clients turning over between 25 and 100, including many legal firms, but also we've got clients across all sectors as well.
Perfect, thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I trained as an accountant, and then my background has been BPO, tech, and education. And then, as you say, for the last 10 years, created Riverview along with a couple of key colleagues, grew that and exited through EY. And on the way through, bought a legal tech business. So for the last few years, it's been looking at EY's side of things and also the legal tech.
Fantastic. So as you can see, just a great set of experience between us. It'd be really interesting to see whether we agree on some of the questions here about the future of the legal sector. But let's talk about the market in general. We've had a bit of a double shock going on recently for obvious reasons. So clearly the pandemic and the resulting recession that's coming off the back of that, but even before that we had the impact of Brexit, and of course this year in particular the potential impact of a no-deal Brexit starting to hit as well. So Dean, how do you see the market at the moment in terms of generally what you've been seeing going on in the market per se, but what you're finding from your law firm clients as well?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I mean, unprecedented times, I would say. When we started the year, nobody could have predicted, could they, how 2020 has played out. It feels a little bit of a surreal space at the moment, I would say, because notwithstanding all the challenges that are out there that we hear on the news every day, we've seen great resilience within our client base and with businesses generally. There's lots of liquidity in the market at this moment in time. So if we think about, the normal distress that you see within businesses, we're not seeing that at this juncture. We're seeing businesses with capacity, headroom within their facilities, lots of liquidity as well. Now, clearly, the future is uncertain. We expect that dynamic to change a little bit. So, as businesses need to repay some of the loans that they've taken on with the backing of the government, they need to pay VAT deferrals. We expect there will be some cash pinches, but at the moment, we've seen businesses adapt. Revenues are down, but what we've seen is businesses take cost out to match those revenue streams. So, more importantly, businesses don't fail because of a lack of profits. They fail because of a lack of cash. And we've seen businesses react really well to protect their cash balances. So at the moment, we feel like we're in an okay space. The perception is that might change in the months ahead, dependent on how the situation unravels. What we have seen, though, is both the banks, but also the government react, haven't we, very quickly to come up with measures to support businesses in all sectors. As far as the legal sector is concerned, we've seen once again great resilience. The benefit of the legal sector is that a lot of firms that we deal with are multifaceted, so they deal with different disciplines. So what we've seen is that certain areas, M&A and corporate activity, have dropped off slightly, but that's been compensated by other areas. So yeah, we've seen businesses, revenues down overall, I would say, but once again, we've seen the sector adapt by taking costs out to reflect those circumstances. So it feels like a slightly surreal situation, as I say, but at the moment, my belief is that businesses are taking some really strong actions to protect their futures.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Something that's in line with some of the things I'm picking up as well. One interesting trend we've been hearing about recently is, as you know, lots of law firms are in the season when they're renewing their professional indemnity cover, and they're seeing some big price hikes in those kind of things. So I think there are some other forces partly working against as well. But as you say, that's primarily a profit thing. At the moment, hopefully liquidity is still people's main focus. Is that in line with what you're seeing, Emma? I appreciate you're in the corporate side of the legal sector. Is that in line?
Yeah, I am, but I also advise law firms as well as part of that sort of rationale within my role within KPMG. So no, it does. The costs point really does resonate. I think people are looking at how they can reduce costs, and we're seeing all sorts of changes being introduced with all sorts of things like expenses policies, and what are people doing with their property, and just generally trying to look at reducing costs in a more sort of strategic way. We're seeing an increase in lockup times, and so that emphasis on billing and billing out needs to continue to be sort of good housekeeping. And we talk about resilience, but yes, we're also seeing a trend where many taking people back off furlough, those law firms that have used the furlough scheme, and then looking at redundancy schemes. So we've seen lots of those. We're seeing lots of that within our client base, but also just in the press, and our colleagues in the legal profession. So I think it's an interesting space, and I don't think we're at the end of it. I think we're at the start of where we're going to get to on those measures.
I think that's right, Emma. I'm really keen that you use the word strategic there. I think this is important. If you think back to those of us who were around in the sector in 2008, there was a lot of very short-term cost cutting going on, which didn't then necessarily help getting out. When the market opens back up again, you need to be ready to go, don't you? You need to be on the start line, ready to push forwards. So I do feel it's a much more strategic response this time. I don't know if you're seeing that or thinking that as well, Paul.
Well, it was one of the questions I was going to ask, is how much of planning for Brexit's coming aboard, how much of actually taking the opportunity, we've heard about a lot more home working and some of the natural cost savings that gets, how much of that is actually long term, and people are taking the opportunity to go, right, okay, as you say, this is strategic, this is our long-term new game plan. A lot of the press and the corporate news that comes out is that entities are saying, well, we're going to do this going forward now. So I think people are taking less of a short-termism and more of a, this is a change, let's take the opportunity to change. And I think some of those cost savings, some of those improvements in efficiency will be long-term.
Yeah, I'm certainly picking that up as well. So Emma, you alluded to this earlier, that this feels like the beginning. What's your kind of prediction then? I we wish we all had a crystal ball here. We won't hold you to it, but are you one of the people who think we'll be out of this by the end of 2021, or are you more in the Bank of England 2023 camp?
Yeah, I think I'm more in the Bank of England camp. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I was around in the 2008 and probably the one before as well. So it's a different one. This is a medical or a virus driven. So we haven't seen the like of this before. But actually, I think what it's done is had a real shock wave all the way through the economy, and I think that's going to take a long time to put right. And as regards the legal profession, I think you're right, Paul. It's an opportunity for us to seek and to embed change, but I don't think we'll be home working every day, all day for the rest of our days. But I do think the days of open plan and some of the mechanisms we put in place previously are now 2019. They're not 2021, 2022. So I do think we'll all probably be exploring hybrid models, the ways we work, the way we interact with our colleagues. How do we train people? How do we get the energy that you need to develop business? I think those are the interesting models, but I think we'll be looking at strategies that take us through to 2023 and beyond.
Yeah, agreed. Dean, from the bank's perspective, I'm sure you have lots of your own financial modelling. You've probably got V curves and J curves and double dips and W's and all sorts of things. But what's your view at the moment collectively about the shape of the recovery?
I think it changes, to be honest, just because of the situation, the uncertainty that we're currently facing. I think we're certainly thinking that 2021, won't be without its challenges in terms of the business impact of what's been going on. I think a comment was made before that businesses are using the opportunity to revisit historic structures. If this had been a short period of time, I suspect we would have reverted back to type, not only our own business, but also the businesses that we deal with as well. So I do think it's creating the space and also the need to do things radically different to what we've done before, just to make sure that businesses remain relevant going forward. I'm naturally an optimist. I'd like to think that we could trade our way out of this quickly, but at the moment, we're planning realistically for a Q2 return to work. But I can't really see how we're going to achieve that fundamentally without a vaccine, being available to start. Otherwise, we're going to go through this stop-start, series of events that we've seen so far this year. So, whilst I hope that this will recover quickly, it's difficult to see anything other than what Emma said before, that this will be a long-term haul. But as I say, resilience and business adaptation is something that we're seeing regularly at the moment.
Can I just say, as a bank manager, to say you're naturally an optimist, you've just given me hope for the future. Thank you. Sorry, Paul, carry on.
I agree. It's a long term. There's no doubt about that. But I think businesses, certainly those that are proactive, are taking an opportunity to change their model. And I don't just mean home working and big buildings. I mean, if you look at some of the law firms that have actually got themselves closer to customers through non-income generating methods, but they're ingratiating themselves closely. You look at the Bird and Birds and the DLAs and some of the apps and interactions they were giving to their customers to spot COVID movements, to help them with their teams, to help their customers to manage the crisis. All of that was in inverted commas free service, but it's added value. And I think everybody that I talk to is taking the opportunity to change their mindset of customer engagement. This isn't about, you want a service, we'll deliver it, that's the price, we've always done technically good service for you. Now it's about the things that I'm sure we'll come on to later when we talk about other models, added value, increased stickiness between customer and service provider. And I think that is where people are taking more of an opportunity to think, if you excuse the expression, outside the box, to add value rather than just the same that we've always done.
So what other traits are there in the firms that are really embracing this terrible situation? What are the things that are helping firms, whether they're law firms or other businesses, really win? Dean, you talked a little bit about resilience. Paul, you've talked there about added value. Emma, what would be the thing that you would pull out that would set people apart at the moment?
I think Paul's just summed it up really. Their connectivity to their client base, their ability to be diverse and adaptable, and to just do things differently. And I think actually it'll be those firms and those businesses that take decisions. I think if you fail to take a decision, that is going to lead to some troubles ahead. I think those firms that are taking decisions, be that change decisions, status quo decisions, people decisions, property decisions, are the ones that are really looking forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think agility, particularly about decision making, is absolutely key at the moment. And there's a danger, again, thinking back to 2008, a lot of people battened down the hatches and tried to weather out the storm, but actually you've got to go into the storm, haven't you? You've really got to drive forwards. So, Dean, does this apply across the board, Dean, when you talk to some of your other clients as well?
Yeah, I think for sure. And, this is a new way of working. It's a new way of keeping in touch with clients. We've seen some business sectors that have significantly prospered off the back of, the events of the last 6 months. But one word I would use is empathy. So I think businesses have got to show empathy with their clients for the situation we're in at the moment. And I think the empathy word also extends to colleagues' well-being as well. We've got to be very mindful of the way of working and the impact that can have on mental well-being, particularly as we enter a further potential significant period of lockdown as well. But, being proactive with your clients, keeping on the front foot, keeping in regular touch, these are the things that will define long-term relationships, and the way that businesses respond at the moment will cement relationships, hopefully for many, many years to come. But I think empathy is at the heart of that, for my mind, Sarah.
Thank you. Paul?
I absolutely agree. I think we've all seen, there's two parts. One is, I think, during this crisis now, we've all seen those organisations that have either been very helpful, have gone the extra way, and recognise that we're all in this together. And how do I help you? Because you will help me, and ultimately we'll have a long-term business connection. And those that have tried to capitalise. And we all know those organisations that have tried to just make a quick buck out of it, and they won't be the ones that we want to deal with long-term, because people will remember what happened. I think unfortunately, there has actually been a benefit from having the 2008 crash, and also by getting ready for an unknown Brexit, in that people were already planning. Contingency plans to some degree were in place. I don't mean the DR plans, I mean that what do we do if our business model has to change? And people have been up and down for the last couple of years, and so are ready to make proactive decisions rather than procrastinate, as you say. So I think that combination of the two is important going forward.
Thank you. And just before we go on to talk about tech, which clearly is part of the future as well, I'm just interested in what your views are on a no-deal Brexit. Emma, is this something that's causing you too much concern and your clients too much concern at the moment, or do you think at the moment it's been overshadowed by everything else that's going on?
No, I think it became overshadowed, but I think the last 4 weeks and the levels of inquiries we are getting from all types of businesses on Brexit shows a real concern. And there's also that dawning realization, actually, that those businesses that thought it wouldn't really impact them, maybe more tech businesses, businesses that maybe don't provide boxes, across nations and across continents, were a bit more complacent. And we're now seeing absolutely the reverse. We're having conversation after conversation on Brexit and from a legal position on the transfer of data and data protection, on supply chains, etc., but also on VAT, all elements of tax. It's a growing and fast growing area for us at the moment.
I mean, the word unprecedented has obviously been used ridiculous about, but it really is. It's like trying to pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time, because there's no certainty, is there? And I think as businesses, we've got to get so used to navigating uncertainty, which brings me personally back to the agility to get again, which I think is so important. Is that what you're seeing as well, Dean? Are people really starting to now be concerned on both levels? Obviously, recession, pandemic, and no deal Brexit.
I would say there's more talk around COVID than there is around Brexit. And maybe that's a little bit of a cause for concern, but I think businesses are dependent on what sectors they're in, what scale they are, the resources they've got available. There's a different level of preparedness, if you like, for the various Brexit situations. I think there's a bit of Brexit fatigue in the background, if I like. There's possibly a bit of bandwidth challenge as well in terms of how much management teams can face into at any one point in time. I'm also mindful that when we ask the question, there are some businesses that, frankly, because you don't know how it is going to pan out, are thinking that you could spend a lot of time, a lot of money planning for an outcome that might not materialise. So I do think that there is an element of wait to see how things pan out, but also possibly a bit of comfort that there's loads of businesses that are in the same situation. We started to see a little bit of stockpiling starting to emerge, maybe not as much as in the pre-COVID times before, obviously, the old Brexit negotiations became protracted.
Thanks for that, Dean. Paul, have you got anything to add?
Well, I think the only other piece from the organisations that I've been speaking to that were less concerned was because, well, the government will find a way. I know Boris is making the big grand statements, but he'll come to the table. And then over COVID especially, I think the realisation is that the government will do what the government want to do. And actually, he might well mean it when he says, I'm going to walk away and we're not going to have a deal. And certainly, I think that realisation is hitting home more and more to people I talk to, that actually we might end up with a situation. I really can't believe we're going to, but we might. And so that is tilting the balance a little bit more. But I think you're right, Dean. A lot of the focus is, well, let's just see what happens. We're all in this together, but that's not necessarily a great thing.
No.
I would say, sorry, Sarah, that this is a real opportunity for the professional services sector, though, isn't it, to leverage its expertise to support SMEs, mid-corporate and larger businesses. So thinking about how we can use our thought leadership and various skills to help them, businesses on that journey. So, the sector that we represent, I think, has got a large part to play in helping the economy, not only through Brexit, but obviously the implications of COVID as well.
Yeah, very, very well said, Dean. Thank you. Paul, if I just stick with you and let's start to shift the agenda to talk about tech. So is this the time, despite all of this uncertainty, is this the time to be investing in tech, or is this the time to just hold back a bit, see what happens? I think I know the answer to this question, but go for it.
Well, I think, first of all, let's just define what we say by investing in tech. There is a huge bandwagon that it is very difficult not to get dragged onto, that we need not to be dragged onto. There's almost a desire, partly press related, but partly because somebody else is doing it, let's keep up with the Joneses, that, well, we need to invest in tech. So we'll go and buy something quick, or we'll get shares in a tech company, or we've got this lovely spreadsheet, let's just brand it AI, and then we're in the marketplace, aren't we? So there is that huge risk of getting that focus on tech, rather than actually concentrating on what tech is, which is an enabler to improve efficiency, to improve customer service, to give added value to customers. So yes, I would say, especially being involved in legal tech at the moment, there is a place for it, and there is a huge advantage by being involved in and using it in the right place, at the right proportion, at the right time. It's such a minefield, though, to go out and go, we've just done this, oh great, isn't that amazing, let's get loads of headlines for it, rather than actually using it in a proper operational efficiency. But then, as I said earlier on, when we were talking about some of the things that other firms have done as part of COVID to continue the relationship with customers, a lot of that is tech-based. A lot of that has been turned around very quickly using systems or partners they've already got for the benefit of customers, and not, right, we're going to invest £2 million in a new super system that will take 5 years to change the world, by which time it'd be irrelevant anyway.
Yeah, point well made. It's really interesting, your comments there. I've done a few interviews recently, obviously, but end up talking to the press quite a lot, and all of them are thinking that it's synonymous to talk about tech and innovation. And the question I get asked is, tell me about your tech innovation. I said, can I tell you about my innovation? And then can I tell you how we're using tech to enable it? Because it's not, don't make the assumption it's the same thing. People are the innovators, and don't ignore those marginal gains and all the other types of innovation you can do. But the story has just become utterly synonymous as the same thing at the moment. I think it's dangerous territory. So coming to the people aspect, Emma, I mean, obviously the tech is starting to have an impact on people. What are your views about how those two things balance out in the future, and how we equip our people to use the tech in the right way, rather than getting on the bandwagon in the way that Paul talked about?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, but I do question whether it's a challenge for a certain generation and not a challenge for another generation, which I'll put myself into, that it might be a challenge point. But I think what's been said is absolutely right. This is a people business. Professional services are a people business, and people, need that level of interaction. So I think tech for clients are receptive to it, but it has to work, and people have to see the benefits of it. And just rolling out a tool because somebody said it was a great idea, and it having absolutely no perceived added value just doesn't work. When it comes to our people, I think what I would love to see properly developed is better ways of trying to replicate an office learning environment via technology. I think that's where all professional services are going to really struggle, unless somebody tells me there's a piece of tech out there that I've just missed, which wouldn't be a surprise. But I do think our people are fairly used to working via technology, via this mechanism. Our interaction with them are fine, but actually they're all missing people contacts. How do we create that balance between technology and human interaction, and how do we blend that in such a way that we really get the best out of both of those? I think is a real challenge and a question for the future.
It's so interesting, isn't it? If we'd have asked ourselves this question 8 months ago, we probably wouldn't have given quite the response you've just given. I think it really has brought it home, hasn't it? How much the human interaction matters to people. Maybe there's a little silver lining in all of this, in around some of that as well. What's your view on this, Dean, in terms of the role of technology across not just the bank, but the clients as well?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's amazing, isn't it, that we're doing this interaction via a Zoom call. So who'd have thought that we'd be doing that, for your annual conference? And I'd say that we've seen massive productivity gains as a consequence of adapting new ways of working, which technology has enabled. And, we're seeing that right across not only our business, but also the customers that we're dealing with as well. So we've seen significant investment in technology as an enabler. And I think it's important that we continue that investment going forward. Clearly, that's got to be relevant, though. It's also got to make sure that it fits with that empathy and the support that we want to provide clients that I referenced before as well. You mentioned AI. We're seeing investment in the larger law firms in AI as well, but it is expensive, and clearly you've got to make sure, against the backdrop of revenue challenges, that the investment is going in the areas that are going to be scalable and robust going forward as well. So whilst there are many upsides, there are potential pitfalls that potentially businesses need to think about as well. But I would say it's probably accelerated ways of working that would have taken a lot longer to have achieved in more normal circumstances. And in the long term, that's going to be a good thing for all parties. The final thing I'd mention as well that we don't necessarily cover is, if we talk about sustainability, 12 months ago, if you're talking about what's on the minds of directors, sustainability would have been high. It was probably being swamped a little bit by Brexit at the time. 12 months on, it's not only been swamped by Brexit and by COVID. And I do think technology is a great means of reducing our carbon footprint in the long term as well. So we shouldn't lose sight of the benefits that can bring.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that. Just sitting listening to some of you talk, I mean, it seems to me, obviously, as technology changes, not only will it change our existing roles, but it could potentially shape the kind of roles and the kind of balance and mix of people we have in our organisations as well. What's your thoughts on that, Paul?
Well, I think it depends on who you talk to and what, but I'm a great believer in, and it's an awful adage, so apologies, that the farmers don't need to build tractors and don't need to know how to build a tractor. So yes, and I know your point, I do accept that it's probably, there is a degree of generational piece there, but there's a generational level that are using mobile, that are using iOS and are using Android, and they don't need to know how to code, but they need to know what the opportunity is to manipulate data, to use it in a way that's beneficial, whether that be for better working practices or whether it be to offer more services. So I think there's a risk that if you go down to even to coming out of the university and then through training and so on, that we're still focusing on, and from an accounting perspective, we focus on how to deliver accountants, how to deliver T accounts and how to balance books, and the same with law, rather than actually saying that's very important, yes, but if you don't think about the way in which you can work and the way in which you can use technology or the way in which you can challenge practices, then I think we risk people going, well, that's great, but it's not on a phone and it's not iOS, so I don't really know much about it, and I'm not used to challenging. I years ago sat with a lawyer who, and I was just having coffee with him, and he said, we were talking about the system you're using, and it took 3 or 4 seconds to refresh a page. And just while I was telling hang on a minute, how many pages do you use a day? And worked out that it was hours a week of time just sitting there waiting for page to refresh. I said, well, have you challenged this? Well, no, that's the system. Well, actually, if you've got an ideology of how to challenge, an understanding of how tech works, then you'll be more inclined to improve yourself and improve the products that you use. So I think there's an educational piece there that says it shouldn't just be focusing on the technical knowledge, but actually more of an understanding of how it can be delivered.
Emma, do you have a view on that as well, and also kind of the shape and mix and type of people that you'll be employing in 5-10 years time as opposed to now?
Yeah, I completely agree with Paul. You don't, start with what you need and build it out. Don't start with the technology and try and fit the technology into the piece of kit that you need to be able to deliver those services. We're having that conversation actually, quite interesting, about what the shape of the team might be going forward. And if we were in this scenario, long term with predominant home working, the trainees coming through and that more junior level, and it's maybe to do with some of the work that we do within the legal team, but actually it's becoming a more senior. Other requirement is for more senior, more experienced lawyers who can think more widely, who are more self-contained within what they can do, who can deliver probably more efficiently on that basis, and that the training model and the more junior layer, I think actually I question, and I'm passionate actually about training and developing people, but I'm not sure what the best way of doing that is going to be if we're in a sort of similar scenario to here. And I think actually we are looking at a more senior legal team.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Dean, I'm just reflecting on the amount of investment that people are having to do in tech, and there's a bit of a challenge here, isn't it? That if you're not doing it and everybody else is doing it, you're going to get left behind. Do you think it's going to drive further consolidation in the sector? Because to be honest, the bigger you are, the better economies of scale, the more you can invest in this kind of thing. Is it going to drive further consolidation, or do you think that there will be law firms that can happily stay smaller and not make these kind of investments and still stay relevant in the future?
Yeah, good question. The honest answer is that it's probably a combination of the two, I would say, Sarah. I think it does go back to that relevance point that I mentioned before. Clearly, if larger firms can invest and deliver services in a more efficient way, though, that is going to make them even more compelling, isn't it? So from that perspective, I would say that the overall trajectory or direction will be that there'll be further consolidation on the back of this, simply because the larger firms will be able to offer something in a slightly different, and we shouldn't lose sight as well in all sectors. It's what the consumer wants, isn't it, in reality? In recent times, and particularly, over the last 12 months, people having access to information and solutions in times that suit them 24/7 is something that technology is really going to enable. So I think it's important that the customer probably drives what that looks and feels like going forward. I also think that we should see technology as opportunity rather than threat. If there's a means of doing things quicker, more efficiently, more productively by embracing technology, what it does do is it frees up resources and capacity for the more complex stuff, but also it reduces costs, not only for the businesses that are delivering it, it also potentially reduces costs for the recipient as well, which has got to be good in terms of overall economics as well.
Thanks, Dean. I'm just going to stick with you and shift the conversation on to financing and liquidity. You touched upon this in your first response, actually, when we were talking about the market. How do you see liquidity over the next year to 2 years, and potentially interest rates as well, in terms of good times for borrowing, etc.?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the reference was made before to the financial crisis at the 2008 to 2010. This is a very different scenario. The financial crisis, let us not lose sight of it, and working for a bank was bank-led effectively. The current situation looks and feels different. The response we've seen from the government, but more importantly, there's lots of liquidity within the banking sector. There are capital structures that are now far more resilient to withstand the sort of downturn that we're now facing into. So I would say liquidity feels healthy. Not only have you got traditional banks, you've also got peer group lenders that have emerged over the last 10 years. You've got debt funds. There's a wealth of private equity money that's available as well. So I would say that that there's lots of cash out there. Now, clearly what it does do is it chases the best deals, though, doesn't it? So if you look at what's happening within the tech space, for example, or healthcare, the multiples for businesses in those sectors have significantly grown because of their resilience that they've shown over the course of the last 6 to 9 months. So in terms of interest rates, now's a good time to be a borrower, in that the cost of funding is at all-time lows. I still think that businesses maintaining flexibility there in their structures of their funding and their capital base will also be pretty key going forward as well. So the businesses that can act with fleet of foot, that have got structures that include appropriate equity, include appropriate debt, and access to additional markets potentially, will be the ones that potentially will prosper the best.
That's great, thank you. Just bringing you in on this, Paul, in terms of private equity, which is something that Dean started to touch on there, what are your views about where the relationship with private equity and the legal sector will go in the future, and what are perhaps the pros and cons of involving private equity in law firms?
I think it's a strange one. I think PE wants to get into law. Certainly at the moment, there's a huge amount of pent-up demand within PE anyway, because the deals haven't closed over the last however many months we've been in this, but they want to get in, but actually they find it difficult operating within a partnership model. A lot of partnerships that take it off the table each year rather than a long-term strategy for investment and growth. And how do they get an exit? How and when do they get an exit? I think the fundamental problem is perception, is that a lot of partners in a lot of firms believe that once they get PE or anybody else in, then it's not their business anymore. Actually, it's just a different ownership structure. The reality is the banks in a lot of cases are pretty much the investor in these businesses anyway, and in effect own it. So all you're doing is swapping out for a different owner. And then if it gets sold on in 5, 6 years time or whatever it be, there's another owner. It's still the same business. It's still the same opportunities to grow, the same desire to grow. I think the difficulty for PE is balancing that, well, it's not my business anymore, with also yes, but there's a long-term financial structure and investment model here. And hey, we all know that PE are only in it for a certain period of time and want to make money. But most PE firms don't want to rape and pillage. They want to leave a successful business because somebody else will buy a successful business. Right. So they want in, but I'm not sure yet, and certainly with who knows what the next 12, 18 months will bring as opportunities. I don't think they've quite got their head around the structures of the business yet. And I think there was a desire and a hope that ABSs would facilitate that, but that in itself hasn't proved to be the case. And yet, if you look at challenger ABSs and new structures, they're a different beast altogether, because they're set up from brand new. They have brand new structured tech systems, brand new structured contracts, capital policies that are different. So yes, PE can get in there, but they're typically too small or haven't quite reached maturity for a PE firm to come in and make a big difference.
Thanks, Paul. Another interesting trend that I've been picking up on, and I hope this is a real trend rather than one of those kind of urban myths, is that increasingly PE are also looking at ethics, sustainability, and values as well. So you're right, it isn't just about this quick financial fix. You know, there is such a growing trend towards ethical investment now, or sustainable, almost green investment, if you like, that actually they're asking different questions and they're approaching the relationships in a slightly different way as well.
Well, I think that's right. You've got to remember where PE gets its money from. It doesn't just appear. They have investors, and those investors probably have investors. And so ultimately, the way in which most people in the world are viewing the world going forward, sustainability, ethical nature, environmental processes, and so on, that transfers itself into PE firms. The same as you might have your own pension and say, I only want to invest in ethical businesses from a pension perspective. PE funds are, and there are specific PE funds that are purely ethical based or purely sustainable based, but most of the larger PE firms and some of the boutiques now especially are starting to be far more balanced in their approach and return on capital.
And it links to what Dean said earlier about following the consumer, essentially, isn't it? It's a similar thing.
Yeah.
So if I may, Emma, I'm just going to bring you in just to keep us moving on. What's your view on, obviously we had a flurry of IPOs for a short time with law firms, which caused the legal press huge amounts of column inches to be devoted to that. Clearly that's all kind of slowed down a bit now. Do you think that's going to pick up again once we're over the worst of the pandemic, or do you think the initial flurry has probably led to some learning that means it doesn't expand much further?
I think it's led to learnings, and I don't think that means that it won't expand further. I just think people are looking and waiting to see how things are going to play out, and looking, I think, particularly now where There are pressures on law firms and sort of, their figures that are going to be posting, the reaction of the market, how that's going to sit alongside, more traditional makeup. So I think people are now waiting to see a little bit about what's going to happen.
Would you agree with that, Dean?
Yeah, I think that's very well put. So I think there will be firms that go down that route. There are some issues, aren't there, and some challenges that PLCs have for the very reasons that Emma's just mentioned before. I'd certainly agree with the comments Paul made before, and sorry, going back to it on private equity as well, in that if you think about the resilience this sector has shown, you think about the consolidation opportunity, you think about the opportunities that lie ahead. My view is that private equity will find this sector very attractive. Actually, for that very same reason, PLCs and listings could also find this sector attractive as well. So it's great, isn't it, that there's various options that these businesses in this sector have got to potentially fund their future aspirations.
Thank you. Emma, if I may, I'm going to talk now about some of the new entrants to the sector, and obviously you can talk with a fair amount of experience here because technically you're in one of them. Clearly the new entrants really fall into two camps. There's the big four who are now all in this territory and whom you represent, and I can bring Paul in on this in a bit, but obviously we've got other new entrants like the the virtual law firms, etc. Should we be worried? Should we be quaking in our boots about all the new players in the game, or do you think we can all rub along quite nicely together and make the cake bigger for everybody's benefit? Or is this a proper competitive war here?
I don't think it's a competitive war. By nature, I'm a collaborative individual, so therefore I look to see how we can all complement each other and work together. But I do think what it does is cause law firms, or should be causing law firms, to reassess their model, their strategy and their structure. I do think that law firms will be losing business to those new entrants into those markets. I don't think they're going to disappear overnight. I don't think one's going to replace the other. I think there is an absolute place for both models, but I do think that I think challenge is good. The reason I joined KPMG after many years in private practice was because I wanted to explore that challenge. There's nuances and differences, and there's overlap. I mean, I work with law firms all the time to support what I do and to help me deliver my services to my clients. So it's a partnership in that respect. At the same time, I know that I've taken work off of the more traditional, so I do think it's a really interesting space, and I think it will challenge, but I just don't think it obliterates private practice law firms. But I do think private practice law firms can learn a lot from what those new entrants to the market are doing.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously Paul was a very early adopter new entrants to the market. So it was 2012, wasn't it, that you and two colleagues founded
February,
Riverview. How do you think things have shifted since then, and how would you review or look at the new disruptors, if you like, compared to what you guys were doing nearly 10 years ago now?
I think, well, first of all, I think, picking on Emma's point, it's an expanding market, so I think there is room for everybody. I think naturally there is a competitive nature, so those smaller entities that are not efficient will either merge or not be here in the next couple of years. In every other sector I can think of, there is more than one corporate structured model for delivery of the service. Just because, and partnership is here for the rest of eternity, and it will work very successfully for some organizations in law, but for other reasons, other structures will work just as successfully. The problems we had going back to 2012 was we were at a time when nobody thought there should be any other structure. So we were fighting, if you will, just to make people believe that there was another way of doing things, not necessarily a better way, although clearly we would try and emphasize that, but just a different methodology, a different way. We were able to raise capital at a time when nobody else, nobody PLC'd, Knights weren't around, nobody looked at putting investment into law firms because that just didn't happen. And so that was our biggest part, was convincing people that we were legitimate and that we were here for the long term. Now, I think it's pretty much accepted that there are alternative structures. It's pretty easy to launch a specialized alternative structure. If you want to pick up you're differentiating on a particular product set, or you're highly tech advanced and therefore you can be more efficient, or you can remote work or be adaptive in that way, that's great. To launch an alternative structure like the Big Four have, and let's face it, KPMG aside, from my own experience, I know that's been very difficult for some of the Big Four, and they are still very much regionally, i.e. UK, France, territory based, relatively small law firms rather than global entities, because they are still individual partnerships. So I just think it's easier to get in. There is more tech focus, there is more capital availability because the different focus. But I think, so what? That doesn't cause, that doesn't mean that the current structure and current models are dead. It just means that, as Emma said, they should adapt and they should learn, and they should feel the challenge, because why shouldn't you? Every market does.
Yeah, I think ultimately it will make it stronger, actually.
Yeah.
I think that diversity in any realm of life, adds strength, I think. And I think the opportunity is there for the legal market to get stronger because of the diverse nature of the entrants in it.
Yeah, and ultimately customers, they won't force the decision, but they will move that decision, because they will go, well, I prefer working with this type of organization because they do it this way. And to some degree that will shift the structural model anyway. Why shouldn't customers have a choice?
I love this idea that you referred to there at the beginning, Emma, as well, about collaboration. I mean, I'm a big believer in that, and this abundance mentality, which again, if you think about where social attitudes are going, the collaboration, the in it together, this making the cake bigger for everybody. The UK has got enough challenges on its hands at the moment. If we can all kind of do what we can to be in good competition with each other, I think that's a much healthier place to be as well.
And also, I think if you take that model and you take that idea as a culture that we think is a good one, then actually, looking at law firms, traditional partnerships and some of their challenges, actually, we could mitigate some of those challenges by people working together more closely. Why does a law firm have to deliver every single service line? Why isn't it working in partnership with other legal practices that are specialists in certain areas? Why is this individual fiefdoms created around that sort of partnership mentality, which can take it through to the firm level, when actually we have the opportunity to really think outside the box, to take Paul's earlier comment and just say, okay then, well actually, why don't we say, actually we don't really have a property practice, so why aren't we working collaboratively with other firms that do? And how does that not help us all?
And I think there's a piece about making sure that we still attract the best talent into the market, because some people won't be attracted because they don't like the partnership model, and we've lost highly skilled individuals that would have been great in the sector. So let's give everybody an opportunity. I think there are still some stalwart naysayers that don't want change, but they will be in any sector. It doesn't matter that it's law. But we should avail everybody the opportunity to contribute, and different models allow that.
Yeah.
So we're pretty much out of time now. Sorry, make one final point, Dean, and then we're just going to do a quick wrap up. So
I was just going to echo, I think, a really healthy conversation around competition, not only in this sector, but clearly it's been mentioned, banking is a sector where there's been significant entrants within recent years. My own natural instinct is that you're uncomfortable in the first instance, but actually it's healthy. It avoids complacency, it encourages investment, it encourages creative ways of working. So actually, for both the businesses in the sector, but also for the clients, I think competition in the long run is really healthy. And to be honest, it will mean that it will be a survival of the fittest a little bit, but which once again is great for both the sector, but also for the client experience as well.
Agree with that. I'm just kind of reflecting on some of the first conversations I remember years ago in the law firm I was at the time, when the Big Four started to come into the sector. It's like, well, we're going to have to stop working with them. We can't refer work anymore. Almost like we've got to treat them they're like they're our
the enemy.
Exactly. And thankfully it isn't. We have a great relationship with KPMG, and I don't see any reason why that relationship needs to change. I think we're much more mature now. I think we understand business and we understand the nature of complex business relationships. So thank thank God we've moved on. So thinking about the future then, final word from everybody. Are you optimistic about the future or concerned about the sector? And give me your time frame, because clearly in 10 years time you might feel differently to 2 or 3 years time. But Emma, what's your views in which time frame about your sense of optimism for the sector?
For the sector as a whole, I have a cautious sense of optimism. I do think there are pressures on the sector to change and to develop, financial pressures as much as anything else, and partnership model, and also, you know, that sense of how do we get that inclusive workforce, how do we adapt, and how do we allow for flexibility, etc. But we've had this situation that's been brought upon us, and I think that has launched an ability for flexibility. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to take what we've learned in the last 6 months and really move the diversity and the inclusion agenda forward in law firms.
Thank you.
10 years, brilliant.
Fantastic. I'm now coming to the optimistic regional bank manager. See, are you going to surprise us, Dean, or are you going to go?
No, you know the answer already. As I say, I'm optimistic for the sector. I think this is a sector historically that has done well in downturns and upturns. So if you think about where we are now, you know, there's opportunity for businesses to adapt and to reflect to support the economy in the current circumstances. At some point, we will trade our way out of this, and that will create opportunity for legal firms as well. So COVID and Brexit create uncertainty. For my mind, that creates opportunity for this sector. So in the long term, my view is I'm really optimistic for this sector. And also, we've seen the way that it's adapted in the last 6 months. Those qualities will stand it in really good stead moving forward as well. So I'd say, look, it's a sector that Lloyds likes as well. So we've got strong appetite to support businesses and their growth aspirations. So let's go for it.
Sounds good to me. What about you, Paul?
I'm optimistic. I think in 2012 we thought the sector will be changed considerably in 5 years, and it wasn't. I think the momentum is there now that we hoped was there in 2012-13, and for the reasons Emma and Dean have both said, I think over the next 5 years, I think yes, will be the sector will look different. Will start to look more combined and more collaborative, and I'm optimistic for the long term.
So we all agreed, or maybe we're just naturally optimists. We're the natural optimists, but I would agree too. So thank you so much for your time today. I found that a really interesting discussion. Actually, it's really good to talk to like-minded people, irrespective of which organisation we work for. We're still people, aren't we? So really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.